Hi everybody, welcome to a new tutorial on Klevgrand Pipa. In this video I'm going to go through all the controls that you have in Pipa. I hope you enjoy. So let's start. As you can see in Pipa we have a number of parts on the screen, or the screen is divided in a number of parts. We have a voice part here, we have an LFO part, a reverb part, a room part, an output part as well, a preset part over here, and finally we have a header part where you have a button called setup where you can adjust additional settings. So let's focus on the voice part first. Here is where you can choose the type of voice that you would like to use. Down here in this drop down, it says at the moment mixed, but you can choose between a mixed voice, male voice and female voice. Please bear in mind that how good that voice will sound will really depend on where you play on the keyboard. As male, of course, with this type of preset, let's set it to female, or going back to a mixed one as well. Next we have a fluctuation dial. Here is where you set how fast you have transition between these internal wavetables. So if you set it right up to the maximum, then transition will be very quick as you move up and down the vowels and dynamics settings. But that could introduce some artifacts. If the dial is right down to 0, you probably don't incur problem of adding artifacts, but on the other hand, it may sound a little bit more robotics. So in order to try that, you really have to set the fluctuation first, and then you need to act on the viol and dynamics correspondingly. That's down to 0. Okay, next we have a dial called the randomness. This allows you to inject small random signals that will affect the pitch and the envelope. And this is interesting to give you some character. Okay, next we have the selection for two voices being played at the same time or only one. So, and it really depends on other settings that you have. Next we have a vowel setting, and let's set the dynamic down to 0 as well to hear it better. And this very much moves the sound from a closed soft O to an open A. We have a dynamics also slider. This allows you to play soft notes right to strong or 40 sound. So let's reset it down here. We have also two buttons here, and every time you see a button which says mode, which stands for modulation, this is where you can set how, for example, your modulation will impact the vowel in this particular case by velocity, which you set by percentage, also via two controls that you can define in the setup section, but I'll come back to that later. You have a body slider, which effectively increase or enhance the fundamental frequency, so it gives more body. You have a nose slider, which allows you to emphasize the signal around 3 kilohertz. You have an air slider, which allows you to introduce higher frequencies that simulate that breath flow. Next, we have two parameters and to really decide how the sound is positioned in the space, in the environment, in the room. You have ultimately the intensity is dictated by the spatial width, So I set these to maximum, and you can have it set as random. So it will position the pan effect randomly. Or you can have it based on panorama, which will go from low frequency from the left to higher frequency to the right. And hopefully you have an headphones which allows you to hear that. Or you can have dubbing pan. And this works only if you have two voices, and in that case it will position accordingly the voices left and right. And remember, the spatial width allows you to decide the intensity. Okay, let's move on now to the next part, which is the LFO. So you have an LFO range. Is practically the intensity. You have the rate here dial. Changes the rate. You can also control effectively via control 1 modulation how much the range is impacted through this dial. And you really need to have an external control to do that, which at the moment I don't have, but you can use, if you define modulation wheel to be your control, you can use that to influence the range here and the intensity. These LFO settings are set for each of the 4 different tabs here, for gain, pitch, dynamics, and vowels. So as you set something for gain, when you move to pitch, it will be set differently. So let's try to set an LFO for pitch. So really interesting that you can set that differently based on gain, pitch, dynamics, and also vowels. Here we have the envelope for each of the different categories. There are some differences in the way that the envelope works between the different tabs. For example, all of them share the release time. So if you move the release time here, you will find that the position is the same for all the others, not the intensity, but the position in terms of time. The gain tab also has decay and sustain. Of course, you can move the nodes by time, and you can change also the type of curve. Okay. Additionally, pitch, dynamics, and vowels have here a weight, which effectively the changing the weight, you can decide how much the gain, the envelope will affect that particular parameter. So, for example, let's move this. Actually, let's do it on the pitch. Let's move it up like so. And you can have a positive or also negative impact as well as a percentage. Okay, and so for example, at the moment you heard it on the release, but you can have it also on the attack. Or you can have it the opposite way. And of course you can use that for dynamics and vowel as well. Now, you have a release mode for velocity and also for attack. Okay, and this is how velocity will impact the attack and also the release. Okay, for the ADSR. Moving on, we have a reverb part. Here is very simple. You set the type of reverb, normal, dark, bright, etc. Let's adjust these. Actually, let's move the preset forward and back so we get the default one. So you can set the different type of reverb here. You can change the level. You can change the width for the reverb. And the size, of course. You can change the room, and you have different type of rooms. And of course you can change the level, and finally we have a section for the output level, which also have modulation attributes as well. Okay, moving on, we have a preset section or part here. We have seen it in the previous video. You can choose different preset which split into different categories. So you can move back and forward in the preset list. So nice and simple. And finally, we have a header part where you can find not only the name but also setup button. If you click on the setup, here is where you define what is the source for control 1 and 2, and you have some which you can choose by default, or you can also click on the learn button, then send MIDI CCs through your external controller and establish what is the external controller parameter, which will act as that source that you are changing. You can decide also what will be the attack in terms of behavior for both control 1 and 2. Finally, we have pitch band settings, which can go from 0 to 24 to octave. You can also decide how the attack or the change will work. You can set Pipa to work in legato mode, effectively to be monophonic. And if you do that, you can also set the gliding time for both the pitch and also the velocity. Okay, so I hope you found this tutorial interesting and useful. See you next time. Bye.